Well, hello. Thanks for coming back to check out another video. So, we are here today to sit down and talk about some eyeshadow palettes that are going to be leaving my collection. This is a small eyeshadow palette declutter. I have them all sitting here in this bin. I believe you guys have already seen my palettes on the chopping block video. Those are palettes where I'm on the fence about decluttering them, and I really want to scrutinize them and put them to the test. So during my absence, these palettes that are in the bin, they fall into like two groups. They were either palettes that I've already like put to that high scrutiny because I was on the fence about them, or they're palettes where I wasn't on the fence about them. Like I can look at them, I remember the last time I used them and I wasn't impressed with them, or I look at the color story and it just doesn't add any value into my collection. So I'm more than happy to let go of these. I think it's just this time of year I really get in that like, I don't want to say decluttering mood, because I don't declutter for the sake of just decluttering, but I do at this time of year really sit down and look at my makeup collection as a whole, not just eyeshadow palettes, but I do try to look at things and say like, okay, is this something that I really want to hang on to, that I enjoy using, and that I want to, bring into the new year with me. So I hope that this all sounds interesting to you guys. I don't do declutter videos like other people, where they do like that, the bird's eye view is what I'm trying to say. And they're at the drawer and kind of like decluttering with you. When I've filmed videos that way in the past, it just always feels very rushed and spontaneous for me personally. And I have ended up decluttering palettes that I later on regret. So I really like to do it this way because I don't have any like regret declutters anymore. And two, when I do it this way, I feel like I can sit back and really kind of organize my thoughts before I sit down and film, and give you really like solid reasonings as to why I'm personally decluttering these palettes, and maybe that you find helpful. Like it helps to steer you in the right direction if we have some similar like makeup tastes. So, but I'm not knocking anyone who does film it that way. Good for them if they can, do it right there at the drawer. That's just not me. Just wanted to give you that heads up warning. So this is a little bit different style of declutter if you're not used to seeing declutter videos from me. How much more can I ramble on in an introduction? Alright, so we're going to get into these palettes that were in the bin in no particular order, but I am going to try to group them, like keep brand, together. So the first brand, I have 8 BH Cosmetics palettes in my lap to talk to you guys about. That is shocking in a lot of ways. I feel like if you've been here for any length amount of time, you know that BH Cosmetics is one of my absolute favorite brands. I don't know how I feel about them since they've been bought out by Makeup Revolution. I haven't tried anything, that they've newly released, so I don't know if they'll retain that title. But for now, they are still my favorite drugstore brand. So having 8 palettes from them, I will say just, all 8 of these palettes, just for me, they don't have that great, amazing BH Cosmetics quality formula-wise that I have come to know and love from some of my favorite palettes, like the Blueberry Muffin or the Passion in Paris or the Sweet Shop collection. So I'm more than happy to like part with these 8, but instead of just waving a stack around in your face, let's get into this. So I have 3 palettes from the Birthstone collection line. So the first one is Aquamarine for March. So if I open this up, all of these Birthstone palettes have the same kind of format where you've got this bigger Birthstone shade. Then they gave you 6 eyeshadows that correspond to that shade, and every palette within here has a pressed glitter. I don't really fuss with the pressed glitters, like it's just not something that I want to put near my eyes. But speaking of this palette specifically, my eye is always drawn to like 3 shades in particular. This bigger aquamarine shade, and then this pastel kind of sky blue matte, and then the darker red matte down here. Now with the 2 matte shadows, it's just, they don't ever carry that much of a punch on your eye as what you look at in the pan. So you try to build them up to get that intensity, and then they just end up blending away and becoming a little bit more patchy. That's just not fun to work with. And then this aquamarine shade is one of those like, it's like a white base shade that has like a blue shift to it, and it's just so underperforming. And I know that BH Cosmetics can do better, because within the Opal palette for October, they have a similar shade. It's white base, but it has a pink flip. That shade is so stunning. I love that one. And so this one is just super underperforming compared to like the intensity and the payoff that you get from that other shadow from the Opal palette. So I'm happy to let this one go. The other one I have is Diamond for April. So this one is really good quality. I actually do really enjoy this one. If it's one that you've been eyeing and you see it somewhere, I would definitely recommend picking this one up. I feel like you get a really good, nice selection of shades within here. The silver shadows are quite nice, quite stunning. So in saying all of that, you might be like, Haley, why are you decluttering it? I own the Natasha Denona Mini Xenon palette, and I'm far more likely to reach for that palette when I want the grays and the silvers and like the nice black shade than I am going to reach for this one, simply because this palette clocked in at $9 and the Natasha Denona Xenon palette clocked in at I think like $25, and I really want to make sure I get my money's worth out of that palette. So this one is just it's like a regret purchase. Like I should have really thought about this and scrutinized my purchase more before I actually like bit the bullet on it, but it is a very nice palette. So then the last birthstone palette that I have from BH Cosmetics, this one pains me the most. This is Sapphire for September. This was the birthstone palette when I ordered mine last year during Black Friday, I think. This was the one that I was the most excited for. Like, this color story is just everything. It's dark and moody, and you have these really nice like blue purple shades within here. It's just so underwhelming, so underperforming, and I've seen so many other people obtain really great eyeshadow looks from this palette, but this one has just never worked out for me. The matte shadows in here are what I was specifically really excited for, and they blend away to nothing. They're patchy, they don't hold up on my eyes. I feel like no matter what eyeshadow base I use, if I set my base, if I don't set my base, if I go in with the darkest shadow first, or, you know, go in with the lightest shadow first, like it doesn't matter what I do, the shadows fade throughout the day. And I don't experience that with other palettes from BH. Now the shimmers in here are quite lovely. The Sapphire, the sporty shade, and then the cool shade. And I was a little bit tempted to keep this palette just for those three shadows alone, but I don't want to do that. I have these three shadows, maybe not exact dupes of them, but I do have very similar shades within my collection. I don't, enjoy this palette, so why hang on to it? All right, two palettes from their travel series collection. So this first one is Party in Puerto Rico. This one launched, I believe, around the same time, if not exactly at the same time as Passion in Paris. And Passion in Paris is a lovely, wonderful palette. I absolutely love that one. This Party in Puerto Rico one, it has a really nice color story. I do get a lot of enjoyment out of like these pinks and these oranges, and it's just so vibrant and it looks so nice. But the formula, again, it just isn't there. I don't enjoy this one. The matte shadows within here, they don't pack as much of a punch as some of the other dark matte shadows in other BH Cosmetics palettes. And then with this palette in particular, it is a palette where you do, if you want that intensity, you have to start with your darkest eyeshadow first and then move on into the lightest shadow. That's not like a huge, deal breaker, I guess, for some people, but it is for me because I'm very much a person where I go from lightest to darkest when I'm doing my eyeshadow. It's just the most like comfortable I am. So when I have to like switch that and work from darkest to lightest, I really have to like a palette in order to keep it. So that is the biggest reason why I want to get rid of this one. And then up next we have Beautiful in Barcelona. So this was a palette that I did like pine after and really want. I've used it one time since owning it, and it just, at the end of the day, the shimmers within here are so dark, and I just don't enjoy really dark shimmers. I like lighter shimmers. I love to do like a very deep dark outer V and then have like a really pretty light shimmer shade. I just feel like that is a really flattering type of eyeshadow look for me personally. And so you do have some lighter shimmer shadows within this palette, within Beautiful in Barcelona, but a lot of the shimmer shadows within here are dark, and I'm just never going to reach for them. I'm never going to enjoy them, so I should just pass this along. Okay, I have two palettes from their Dance Remix collection. I ended up keeping the 2000s palette, but I am going to declutter the 80s and the 90s simply because there's nothing wrong with these. I think these actually, much like the Diamond Birthstone palette, have a nice formula. This is like the great BH Cosmetics quality formula that we've come to know and love. It just boils down to, I have a lot of colorful palettes within my collection. Like I have the Be Perfect Carnival 3, I have the Glam Like Cake palette. I'm pretty sure I have other palettes that have rainbow shades represented in them. And so I just never think to pull this palette out. I never think to use this to come into this. And so it is really pretty, but it just doesn't have a spot in my like collection. Like it's never going to be the rainbow palette that I think of. And then moving on to the 90s palette that they have. So this one is a rainbow palette too. I mean, you do have like a row of neutral shades within here, but this one is very much more like a pastel kind of palette. And I have the Lost in Los Angeles palette. Now, I do think that the Lost in Los Angeles palette from them, the pastel shades in there are just a little bit better than the pastel shades in this palette, but this palette is still really good. However, I'm just not a huge fan of pastel shades. I don't create full-on looks with pastel palettes. Like my Lost in Los Angeles palette is much more of a companion palette for me personally, so I don't need two pastel palettes within my collection. Again, it just boils down to these don't really have a place within my collection. Okay, so the last BH Cosmetics palette to talk about is the Galaxy Chic palette. Now this was a palette that I don't remember when I purchased it, but then my mom saw it and she really loves the baked eyeshadows, marbled eyeshadows. So she took it from me. She's used it quite a bit and then she just, I don't know, fell out of love with it. So she gave it back to me. And objectively, this is a really pretty palette. BH Cosmetics does have one of the best baked eyeshadow formulas in my opinion. But it's like an all shimmer palette. And again, so it's not a palette that I'm going to reach into and do a full-on look with. It's a palette that's going to be a companion palette, and I really don't want to have a ton of palettes like that within my collection. So I've already got Lost in Los Angeles, you know, that I won't do like a full-on look from. I mean, I could if I wanted to, because it does have matte and shimmer eyeshadows. But this one being all shimmers, like I just really don't want a shimmer shadow within my crease, especially like a colorful shimmer shadow. Maybe if it was like a brown, I would do it. But yeah, this one, much like the 80s and the 90s palette, it just does not have a place within my home. If you're seeing these like pink sticky notes on the back, I had contemplated trying to do No Pan Left Behind with my palettes, and I think that's something that I will do next year, but I had went through and like put the sticky note on the back of some of these palettes, and I didn't rip them off before sitting down to film this video. Alright, let's talk about some ColourPop and some Juvia's Place, and then I think that's it as far as having multiple palettes from one brand. The rest will just be one-off palettes. So the first one is a little ColourPop quad. This is the On the Mango quad. Now I have to say, everyone always raves about the packaging of these palettes, like, and it does feel sturdy. I don't know what happened to mine, but okay, you can see it just officially broke. So that's one reason why I want to declutter this. I just can't stand like faulty packaging. I don't know like what the issue was with mine. It had started to break off of one corner, and then just trying to like move it to where I could show that to you guys. Like, it's officially broken now. So on the Mango, there's nothing like objectively wrong with this. This is the really good ColourPop formula. I know some of their quads can be hit or miss. This one has been really nice. It's just a quad, and I don't really have a lot of use for quads. I feel like with quads, you can only do that one same eye look, because I'm not typically a like one and done type of shadow person, or like a two and done. Like, I really like to sit down and play around and get that like really nice gradient effect with my eyeshadows. So I just don't get a lot of use out of quads. And then specifically with the color story of this one, I now own the BH Cosmetics Sweet Shop Orange Sherbet palette, and that one is like just an expanded version of this. You know, it's a 8-pan palette if I'm not mistaken. So I would rather hang on to Orange Sherbet and pass this one along. Alright, Lust for Dusk is another one from ColourPop that I'm going to part ways with. Now, when I open up my Lust for Dusk, if you own this, you might be like, Haley, your Lust for Dusk looks a little weird. I did pop out some of the shadows from my Sailor Moon palette that I've already decluttered from within my collection, and replace my favorite shades from Sailor Moon with shadows that were not so favorite within this palette, is what I'm trying to get at. So since replacing eyeshadows out within this palette, I have played around with it, and I really do. I like that this is a cool tone palette. I feel like ColourPop doesn't always do cool tone palettes, or if they do, they don't always do them right. Like, the color story is a little bit too repetitive. This one felt really nice and flushed out and very cohesive and not repetitive. But I don't know. I never really enjoy the eye looks that I get from it. Like, it's a great ColourPop quality. Like, I don't have any issues like blending these shadows out. It's just not a palette that I enjoy reaching for. I don't feel super inspired by it. And I have other, you know, cool tone palettes within my collection that I think to use far more often than I think to use this one. But if you have been eyeing this one, like, it's not a bad palette by any means. It's just, it's one of those palettes where I bit the bullet and didn't really think about it before purchasing it. So unfortunately, it's like a regret purchase in that sense. but it's just not something that I want to hang on within my collection. Okay, so 2 palettes from Juvia's Place. So I'm going to get rid of one of their quads. This was the Rebel Army quad. I picked up this one, the Army, and then I picked up the Mint, and I had the bronze one, which was like darker bronzy orangey shades. I already let go of the bronze quad. I'm keeping the Mint quad, but I am going to get rid of this one. So I really wanted this to pair it with the Mint quad, you know, but the 2 matte shadows in here, while they are nice and pretty, they are a very dark, like foresty green, and then a kind of like black gray green. At the time of purchasing this quad, those 2 matte shades were really unique within my collection, but I now have the Be Perfect Carnival 4 palette that Stacey Marie did, so the Antidote palette, and that one has like a whole section of just really great, wonderful green eyeshadows, and specifically it does have all 4 of these shades, the 2 shimmers as well, like very comparable shadows within the Antidote palette to this palette. So I just prefer the formula of that Be Perfect palette. These 2 matte shades from within here, they are the typical Juvia's Place matte shadows, and so in my opinion, they're a little bit more on the drier side, and they take a little bit of extra effort to blend them out, and especially since they are so dark, if you blend them out too much, you can like run the risk of them becoming patchy, but I don't experience that with the Be Perfect palette. So again, it just boils down to this isn't really unique anymore within my collection, and I have a palette's formula that I prefer a lot more over this one. So then the other Juvia's Place palette, I think I already decluttered this from my collection. So it's the Warrior palette, which is just their like probably most neutral palette that they've ever put together. This is like Urban Decay Naked Honey. And so I had decluttered this, but then I saw a lot of people, like they were using their Urban Decay Naked Honey palette and they were having a grand old time. And I was like, oh, I want that. So I pulled this one back out from my declutter section and I started using it, and I am just not a bronzy type of person. I don't like straight up gold, and I don't like bronzy eyeshadows on myself, and that's all that this palette offers. Now this is a really nice quality palette. The Juvia's Place shimmers are really nice, really impactful, so I don't have any complaints with it that way. It's just particularly the color story that I don't agree with, that I don't like, and I need to stay away from bronzy eyeshadows. Alright, so just 5 more palettes to talk about, and then we will be through with this eyeshadow palette declutter. So let's talk about this from Huda Beauty. This is the Wild Jaguar palette. Now this is my only experience with Huda Beauty. I have never tried one of the larger palettes from the brand, and I have to say, I have heard people say that the quality of the shadows that you get in these like smaller 9-pan palettes does not hold a candle to the bigger palettes. But her color stories of the bigger palettes don't excite me. Like, they all tend to lean on that, like, mauve-y rosy side. And I just don't find them inspiring. Like, that's a shadow that I have time and time again within my collection from other palettes. So I'm not really interested in picking up anything to try it for myself and see if that assessment is true, like, quality-wise, comparing the 9-pan to the bigger palettes. But with this palette specifically, I really liked that this was an out-of-the-box color story for the brand. But the formula of this is so disappointing. These matte shades are super dry. They can be a little bit patchy. I don't feel like I can build them on top of each other. The black shadow within here, I feel like it tends to lean a little bit more gray, which isn't, like if I'm going to use a black shadow, like, and I'm going to be brave, like I want it to be a black shadow. I don't want it to be a gray. You know what I mean? And then specifically the shimmers within here are what really drew me into this color story. They are some really nice shimmer shadows, and when you swatch them, they're really pretty, and they don't come across as dark like in swatches and on your eyes as they do in the pan. And so I'm quite happy with that, because again, I don't really like dark shimmers, but the shimmer formula in these or at least in this particular palette is on the much more drier side, and it can be a little bit flaky, and so they're hard to work with, and it's just not a palette that I particularly want to fool with and keep hanging on into my collection, because I'll look at it, I'll take it out, and I'll be like, ooh, you are so pretty, I should use you, and then I don't, because I know that it's going to be a fuss and a hassle, so let's just pass it along. Okay, I am going to say goodbye to one of my Kaleidos Futurism palettes. This one has always been my least favorite palette. So it is the Futurism 5, the Electro Turquoise, I believe. Let me try to cover this mirror and not blind you. So objectively, I like the color story of it. Like, I like the shadows individually, not all together. But this is never a palette that I think to reach for when I'm like, ooh, I want that, you know, light baby blue shade, or ooh, I need like a more like tangerine orange shade. Like, it's just not a palette that I think to reach for. The two shimmer shadows within here, Shockwave and Tron. Tron is the more blue shimmer shadow, and then Shockwave is the like kind of silvery white based one. Those are really fun and really pretty. I do enjoy those. I don't want to pop them out and put them in my singles collection though, because that's where eyeshadows go to die, at least here in this household. So I would rather keep this palette intact and try to pass it on to someone. My other issue is that specifically with the matte shadows within here, I don't understand the orange shade. It just does not make sense. It doesn't play well with either one of those two blues that you get within the palette or the brown shade. And so I think that the orange shade specifically throws me off the most. And then again, like I said, these shadows are shadows that I have represented elsewhere in my collection in like better color stories. So just never a Futurism palette that I really got on board with. But I think that it's like the packaging and that orange shade really does make your eyes look to it. And so it makes it look like, oh, this is going to be a really fun palette. And I think that's why I ended up purchasing it. Okay, the Persona Identity 2 palette. Now, I absolutely love the Persona Identity 1 palette. It is one of my favorite hands down palettes that I have within my collection. So I thought, okay, you've got some Ulta points. Why not purchase the Persona Identity 2 palette? This is a palette that has been on my wish list for a very long time, and I finally bit the bullet. I've used it twice, and I'm just not impressed with the formula of this. I don't know if they reformulated their like eyeshadow palettes, but this does not hold a candle to the Persona Identity 1 palette that I have. Now, mine is the old packaging, the 1, and I know that they updated the packaging of the 1 to match the 2. So I don't know if that still rings true, like if the 1 still outshines the 2, or do they now have more of a same formula? No idea. But the one that I have, the shimmer shadows in it are just so nice, and like, it is a more neutral cool tone palette, but they are so nice and so pretty, and I do really enjoy them. These shimmer shadows within this palette, they just don't last on your eyes. No matter what trick I try to do, concealer, eyeshadow primer, unset base, set your base, NYX glitter glue, all of those tricks, they just don't work. I feel like these shimmer shadows fade pretty quickly on throughout the day of my makeup wearing life, and it's just not something that I want to fool with. Okay, let's talk about a Natasha Denona palette, and you know which one it's going to be. I think you've all been waiting for me to declutter this one. So it is the Love palette. I know that this is so many people's favorite eyeshadow palette that Natasha Denona has done, and so when it went on sale for half off, that's why I picked it up. But I have to say, the color story of this just isn't inspiring to me. Now, I have rearranged mine. If you're looking at this and you're like, Haley, that's not how the Love palette looks, I did rearrange mine to try to make it a little bit more inspiring, but I still don't find myself reaching for this. I still, when I want like a pink shadow, I'm more likely to dip into, for instance, my Hella palette or my ABH Jackie Aina palette or some other thing. If I want a purple, I tend to like reach for the Carnival 3 palette. Like, this palette just is never one that I think to use, and I think that I'm so disappointed in it because it was my fault. But I have these types of shadows represented time and time again within my collection. And I have to say, the quality of this palette does stack up, and it's true to the Natasha Denona formula, at least like in my experience with these midi palettes. So this just simply boils down to the color story. I don't find it very inspiring, and I just don't want to keep this around just for the sake that it's like Natasha Denona. You know what I mean? Because I think that's why I've allowed it to like hang on in my collection for as long as it has, is because it's like, oh, but it's fancy, like I need to keep it. Okay, so the last palette to talk about is from a brand that was new to me this year. So this is from Unearthly Cosmetics. This is the Witching Hour palette. I picked this up in order to pair this with the Lure palette. And I have to say, I absolutely love the Lure palette. I think that that one is a really well done palette. The mattes within the Lure palette are very comparable, at least formula-wise, not like color-wise. But the formula is the same. So like the mattes in here pack a really nice punch. They're easy to work with and easy to blend out, much like with the Lure palette. Specifically, the reason that I don't enjoy this particular palette from them is because the 3 shadows in here that are the shimmer shades, so this green, this purple, and then this orange down here, they're very much on that like softer shimmer side. They are not like the punchy kind of shimmer formula, and that is a formula that I really enjoy. I want my shadows like my shimmer shadows to be seen from space. You know what I mean? I don't really want like a soft shimmer. And so that's what you're getting from this palette. Now with the Lure palette, the shimmer shades are very punchy and impactful. So I know that Unearthly Cosmetics can do that kind of formula. This palette just doesn't, you know, it doesn't do what I want it to do. It doesn't play the way that I wanted it to play when I originally picked it up. So I am going to pass this one along. But with that being said, that is everything that I have for you guys in this eyeshadow palette declutter video. So let me know down below, what is the palette that you are on the fence about? What is the one palette that you have like a hesitation or reservation on whether you should keep it or not? Because I always love to hear different people's like what they're thinking, you know, like what kind of headspace are you in with your makeup. So I hope you guys are having a good day, a good night, or a good whatever, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.